Yes, it is possible to learn Spanish in less than a year, but language learning is never a linear journey, and it can get way messier behind the scenes than we realize and have effects on us that last into the next portion of our language journey, as you will find out with my journey to Spanish. This is the journey of how I did it. After learning German, I went to a German university where I noticed all of the Germans wanted to speak Spanish, and they were the fullest foreign language study classes that the university had. I already had a really good grasp of German, and I wanted to keep on connecting with different people through multiple languages, so learning Spanish was a no-brainer at that point. I was in my second and final semester of being able to be abroad in Germany, and so I made a deadline for myself to study as much Spanish as I could before spring break ended, using, of course, previous knowledge from my very mediocre French with my good working knowledge of Italian and organizational skills that I definitely picked up while learning German. Now, a big disclaimer, though I did manage to learn Spanish in less than a year, none of this happened automatically. It took a lot of work and consistency on my part. Learning Spanish also fed into my insecurities as a human being behind language learning. Because we are way more than language learning machines, we have very real emotions behind all of the study sessions, but our mental state will always affect our language learning in some way. And stick around for the end of the video to find out how my success with learning Spanish actually led to more internal struggle and self-doubt for me in the end. Now, a little bit about my background. I know that studying German before Spanish was a real advantage. I already knew how best I liked to learn. Being new to language learning requires that you experiment with different methods that you might see on the internet and really find out how you yourself like to learn, because it's definitely not going to be the exact same as any other learners. Do you prefer grammar? Do you prefer reading? How long can you go during a study session without losing focus? How hard are you on yourself when you don't quite meet your goals? Plus, how do you navigate when that happens? Because that will happen at some point, and it's already happened to me, I don't even know how many times. So all of that takes time to figure out and adjust as you go through your own language learning journey of learning Spanish. For me, I just knew that I preferred a more academic approach, so using textbooks in a organized manner, ideally paired with a organized self-study online course that was preferably free since I was on a budget. So I knew how I liked to study. I also knew that I wanted to have a goal, which was covering all beginner material, A1 and A2 levels in Germany, and that way I could just get into the low intermediate B1 class and learn more Spanish efficiently and faster that way. And since I knew that the B1 Spanish course would fill up immediately after opening their doors, I had a plan. I figured out my timeline, so I had 1 month to go through all of these Spanish basics with my chosen resources. Number two, I found my resources in advance before I started learning. That way I wouldn't be scrambling. Finding good resources that work for you take time because there are so many resources to choose from. So have fun browsing, but just be cautious about picking too many. Make sure you stick with only a few. Honestly, for me, maximum 3 at the beginning of learning a language so you don't feel overwhelmed. And side note, if you do want access to all of my Spanish resources, as well as access to resources for 8 other languages, make sure you grab my guide down below in the comments. So the main resources that I used was a Coursera course for Spanish that covered A1 and A2. It had explanations of pronunciation, grammar in a very organized way. I used IE Languages, which is a blog website for various languages, but for Spanish, I liked to use it for extra practice and to review some of the same concepts that were explained in my A1, A2 course, but explained in a different way. Sometimes as learners in general, we have to hear the same grammar concept several times and phrased in different ways before it finally clicks. So I found that that was a good combination of the two. I also used Español con Juan on YouTube. He is great at infusing comedy and not taking yourself too seriously in Spanish. So that's why I was really drawn to his channel. And as more supplemental practice, I used Lingoda slides for Spanish, and they are always free to download for very beginner levels up until an advanced level as well. Now, I immediately started speaking to myself in Spanish in my room every other day. Of course, it would take me a few minutes to complete sentences in my brain and then produce them out loud, but I pushed through the discomfort and the impatience that I had with myself in order to do this, because of course I knew I had to speak in Spanish in class, and this was something as simple as me going into the Lingoda slides, looking for speaking prompts, and then answering a question for about 10 minutes, recording myself, or I would just summarize my day and just talk until the timer was up on my phone. Something that really helped me too was noticing the difference between Italian and Spanish, and noting those differences helped me learn even quicker in the fundamental stages. So for example, you would usually see E in Spanish, whereas in Italian, that would be replaced by an I. You would see double letters for the spelling in Italian for some words, and in Spanish that would appear less. Some words were just totally different, like almohada and cuscino for pillow. So I definitely made a separate notebook to note those very different words that I wouldn't expect would be super different. I also noticed the ending. So if you were talking about delusione, you could see that the E is not placed at the end of the Spanish ending. I did already reach a high level in Italian before starting Spanish, just to make sure I had a good foundation for one, so I wouldn't be constantly mixing up both of them at the same time, which would have slowed down my progress for Spanish overall. An acquaintance of mine had already went through the Spanish class that I wanted to get into, so they recommended that I get the textbooks that already went with the class. I actually bought A2, which was the level that I wanted to skip. I bought B1, which would be the present textbook that I wanted to get in for the class, and B2, which would have been a step above where I wanted to get into, just to be over-prepared, because that's, I guess, what I like to do as a language learner, of course. Definitely sounds like me. Best thing about this too is that I could use language laddering, which is essentially using your stronger language, which would be German in this sense, since I was at a German university, and learning Spanish, my weaker language, through that stronger language. Now in the A2 textbook, I looked specifically at what grammar categories and vocabulary categories would be covered there, and I could also compare what was in the A2 textbook with what Lingota gave me for A2 as well. I only spoke to myself for the first month and not with anyone else. I simply listened to a simple YouTube video every day in Spanish, even watching cartoons like SpongeBob and Peppa Pig dubbed in Spanish from my childhood. Since I already knew the plot of most of those episodes, it was really easy to know what was going on and then start seeing how to pair words together more, observing how sentences were formed in the new language for Spanish. So I went in, I took the test and was placed into the B1 course. However, this was only a course that was once a week for 90 minutes. German universities and the education system definitely do not hold your hand. You're expected to do a lot outside of class with your own self-directed learning. So of course the teacher moved us through the different units in the textbook, but I usually found myself going ahead of what we were learning in class. I also started to use a lot of italki and HelloTalk to find language exchange partners. So everything pretty much stayed the same for my first 3 months of learning Spanish, but what I did want to do is, because it was turning summer, my friend who was originally from Mexico but was raised in the US wanted to visit Barcelona in Spain, and I thought, well, this is an amazing opportunity to go with her, and because she speaks Spanish, we can just talk the whole time in Spanish, be surrounded by Spanish, really experience the language. I was totally fixated by this idea, and we went through with it. And the first day, after we had just been speaking Spanish the whole day, I had the worst headache, because sometimes you don't realize when you're speaking another language how hard your mind is working. Even though I was learning a very similar language, it still took so much out of me to be in a totally new country, in a totally new environment for 3 days, that I was just like, at the very end, hey, can we actually speak half English and half Spanish for the rest of these 2 days that we're here? And my friend agreed. But of course, I was on a big high of getting external validation from my friend, and then knowing that I could use this language in real life after a relatively short amount of time of studying. We did go into a lot of bookstores while we were in Barcelona, so I happened to pick up Las Palmas en la Nieve, my very first book that I had ever read in Spanish, but I managed to use my knowledge of Italian and French a little bit and read through a couple of pages each day. When I got back from our trip, I started to look through the B2 textbook to see what other grammatical concepts I could learn. Again, I knew that I really liked learning grammar, and I wanted to make sure that whenever my semester ended in Germany, I could go to a pretty high-level class at my home university once I returned from being abroad. I also knew, if we're getting really technical about it, the subjunctive of Romance languages, that certain grammar concept, there's a lot of small differences between Spanish and Italian. I knew that going in, so I definitely spent a lot of time looking at the differences between the two, and just the fact that once I returned from being abroad and I knew that I wouldn't be able to use any Italian, I wouldn't use hardly any German, I would miss speaking languages in person. And so I knew that there was a large immigrant population in my state back in the United States, and I was very, very motivated by wanting to use more of the Spanish language with them and keep on experiencing language that way. I also had a really good friend who was also born in Mexico but came over to the United States as a child. He was thrilled that I was learning Spanish, and so we were making promises to each other to practice together once I returned from being abroad. Once my my semester in Germany ended and I continued with my classes for my very last year in college, I started applying for internships. I got one at a nonprofit helping immigrants who were seeking asylum. I also interned at a local hospital where they needed interns to translate into Spanish the food plans that they had for diabetic patients. So my superior at the nonprofit organization was American, but my superior at the hospital was actually from Venezuela. So that was nice to get exposed to a Venezuelan accent, because before that I had only dealt with Spain Spanish and Mexican Spanish. And of course, like my friend had mentioned, we reunited. We started to talk only in Spanish with each other and therefore could talk about what mattered to me. I feel like whenever I'm taking a language class or I'm talking with a private tutor, there's always a level of privacy to be kept, but with an actual friend, language can take you so much more beyond of what you see in the classroom and formalities. So it was awesome to use his native language, whereas before, right before I went abroad, we were only exclusively talking in English. That was a great feeling to have. From March to December of that year that I started learning Spanish, I got fluent, as in reached a B2 upper intermediate level in the areas of reading, writing, speaking grammar, and listening. Words of warning, because getting external validation from native speakers, from others who are seeing your progress in languages, it feels so great in healthy doses. I say this because I got so much validation from professors, from other learners, from native speakers about the speed at which I learned Spanish. I got so much of that after moving on to more different languages like Turkish or Arabic, where the resources for these languages were considerably scarcer than what you would find for any of the Romance languages or German. Once I saw that my progress naturally slowed, plus noticing that I was not a student anymore, I did not have the time and financial flexibility to invest so much energy into learning a language. That same validation that I got from Spanish was nowhere to be found for neither Arabic or Turkish. Therefore, I started to think mostly in black and white. I either reach the same level that I did in all of these previous languages in Turkish and Arabic. That's when I will know I have definitely succeeded. If I'm even a step below that, that means I have completely failed. I already had a success metric in my head that I wanted to go off for any other language that I wanted to tackle in the future, completely dismissing life circumstances and some of the new stress that I was going through after not being a student anymore and not having as much support from parents, as much time to spend with friends to practice languages. I started to place my self-worth as a learner and really as a human being on how fast I could learn languages, how much faster than others I could learn languages, because I was so hungry for external validation at that point, since I had had so much of it before with other languages. Though these internal struggles did not specifically affect my Spanish studying, because I learned Spanish pretty efficiently, the success that I had learning Spanish contributed to my negative mental health and negative well-being while trying to tackle languages that came after Spanish, expecting the same results with grammatically and culturally very different languages. So yes, you can definitely go and reach your own definition of success with your own Spanish language learning journey, but you will not be able to enjoy this process fully and celebrate all of your wins if you do not have the baseline foundation of self-compassion to enjoy the success that you've actually made. Additionally, if you've heard my story and you think, oh, I can't even do that in a year, how did she do it? Then I want you to keep something in mind. Bring everything into perspective. I was 21, single, I had no children, was financially supported by my family. So I had a good safety net in case anything were to happen. I was emotionally supported with a lot of language learning friends having the same interests as me. I never lacked anyone to practice with. I just chose sometimes to not practice with people. That meant I was constantly motivated being in that sort of environment, surrounded by people that I wanted to be like. So I didn't have to constantly use my energy to seek this out. I actually wanted to learn this language. People, for different reasons, may be forced to learn languages, and so that'll definitely affect original motivation as well. I had already studied another language, so I knew what kind of methods were working for me already. I had the opportunity and freedom financially and emotionally to choose to go abroad to another country. As I said before, not everyone voluntarily goes to another country, especially if they were forced out of their home country. But I had the financial means and the support to go to the country as well as get all of these language learning resources. I was a student as I said before, but since we had so little class time because we were expected to do so much outside of the classroom, I made sure to bulk schedule all of my classes into 3 days. That way I had 4 days off every week to dedicate to language learning, to travel, to seeing my friends, etc. Also, I wasn't really worried about getting super good grades abroad in my classes, so that meant I had even more time and energy to dedicate to language learning. I wasn't working at all since I wasn't allowed to, and I had access to university classes in that language. So not everyone's life circumstances are the same, and we are all going to change. No matter whether you are just starting your Spanish language learning journey, or you are in the middle of it, or you have stopped it, you too must adjust your language learning routine at some point. As the beautiful human you are behind your languages and the life circumstances you find yourself in keep evolving. Please keep these factors in mind once you dive into your own language learning journey, or if you are already on it. And remember, your language learning story matters no matter where you are in your journey. I told you about mine, but it is up to you to create your own. Make sure you give me a like if you did enjoy this video. Subscribe for even more language tips, as well as tips for self-compassionate mindset shifts that deal with the mental health side in language learning. Comment below why you are learning or thinking about learning Spanish, and if you're ever feeling doubtful or need a quick boost of self-compassion and reframing those negative thoughts that plague all of us at some point, don't forget to check out this next video. Remember to be kind, vulnerable, and I will see you next week.